The anchor chain bar and grill was not so much a place as it was a condition. It clung to the edge of the sprawling Marine Corps base like a barnacle, perpetually damp with spilled beer and regret. The air, thick with the ghosts of 1,000 sea stories, carried the olfactory trinity of the coast: salt, diesel, and frying oil. A low, persistent hum from the neon sign outside, a sputtering anchor that had lost its battle with the letter N, provided the bass note for the clatter of pool balls and the boisterous laughter of men who measured their worth in decibels. The floor was a sticky mosaic of sawdust and things best left unidentified, and the light, filtered through grimy windows and a haze of ambient despair, had the quality of old varnish. It was a place where confidence was currency, and the exchange rate was brutal. It was a proving ground for the loud, a purgatory for the lost. And on this particular Tuesday night, it was the chosen observation post for a woman who was neither. She sat alone at a four-top table in the darkest corner, a deliberate island of tranquility in an ocean of manufactured chaos. Her name was Eris Thorne, though no one in the room knew it, nor would they have cared. To the casual observer, she was a study in profound anonymity. She appeared to be in her late 30s, dressed in clothes that were aggressively nondescript: charcoal gray trousers, a simple black long-sleeved shirt, and practical, low-profile boots. Her hair, a shade of brown that offered no opinion, was pulled back in a severe, functional knot. Her face, devoid of makeup, was composed of clean lines and an unnerving symmetry that was more arresting than conventional beauty. It was a face that gave nothing away. She nursed a glass of water, its condensation tracing clean paths through the grime of the tabletop, and her attention was fixed on a ruggedized tablet resting before her. On its screen were not social media feeds or streaming videos, but complex schematics and dense blocks of technical data, annotated with a language of symbols and acronyms that would have been utterly alien to everyone else in the establishment. She did not drink, she did not socialize, she did not invite interaction. She simply sat, observed, and processed, her stillness a form of gravitational pull, a quiet center around which the noise of the world revolved without ever touching. Holding court at the bar, the very epicenter of the room's clamor, was Sergeant Rex Drummond. He was everything Eris Thorne was not. Where she was a void, he was a concussive blast. He was a big man, built not with the lean efficiency of a modern warrior, but with the blocky, powerful architecture of an old-world brawler. His face looked like it had been carved from naval tradition itself, all hard angles and a jaw that seemed to be perpetually clenched in defiance of a world that was not loud enough for his liking. His uniform, the Desert Marpat camouflage, was worn with a proprietary blend of military precision and casual arrogance. He was the alpha of this small, sticky kingdom, and his pack consisted of 4 younger Marines, all lance corporals and privates first class, who orbited him like eager moons. They laughed when he laughed, drank when he drank, and listened with rapt attention as he spun tales of his own minor glories, each retelling adding another layer of heroic lacquer. His nickname, barked affectionately by his acolytes, was Dog, a moniker he embraced for its connotations of ferocity and loyalty. It was a name that would, in short order, become an irony of crushing, cosmic proportions. The inciting incident, as is so often the case, was born of a trivial need. Drummond's audience had grown by one, a fresh-faced private who looked as if he had just stepped out of a recruiting poster, and the sergeant required another chair to accommodate his expanding court. His eyes scanned the crowded room, a monarch surveying his domain. They passed over clusters of laughing Marines, tables of grizzled veterans, and finally landed on the quiet corner. On the woman. On the 3 empty chairs at her table. A slow smirk spread across his face. It was the smirk of a predator who has spotted easy, unsuspecting prey. It was not just a chair he saw, but an opportunity to perform, to demonstrate his dominance for the benefit of his audience. He pushed himself away from the bar, his movements large and deliberate, designed to draw the eye. The younger Marines quieted, sensing the beginning of a familiar ritual. Drummond approached the table, not directly, but in a wide, circling path, like a shark sizing up a swimmer. He came to a halt beside her, looming, casting a shadow over her and her tablet. She did not look up. She continued to trace a line on the schematic with a stylus, her focus absolute. This, her complete lack of acknowledgement, was the first offense. It was a tear in the fabric of his reality, where his presence was meant to command immediate attention. He cleared his throat, a sound like gravel being churned in a cement mixer. Still nothing. He leaned over, planting his meaty hands on the table, bringing his face closer to hers. The smell of stale beer and unearned confidence washed over her. "May I sit here?" he asked. The question was a weapon, wrapped in the thin gauze of politeness. The tone was not inquisitive but mocking, a theatrical performance for the boys back at the bar. He did not wait for an answer. His hand was already on the back of the chair beside her, ready to claim his prize. Only then did she react. She did not look up at his face. Her eyes, a startlingly pale gray, lifted just enough to meet his hand on the chair. She held the gaze on his knuckles for a long, silent second. Then her focus returned to the tablet. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a dismissal, as clinical and final as a surgeon closing an incision. It was not the reaction he wanted. He had expected fear or annoyance or a flustered apology. He had expected her to recognize his power and yield to it. This quiet, calm permission, this utter lack of emotional engagement, was infuriating. It was like punching water. It robbed his performance of its climax. He yanked the chair out, its legs screeching a protest against the floor. The sound was violent, but she did not flinch. He expected her to say something, to complain about the noise, to finally look at him. She did not. He lingered for a moment, waiting, needing the confrontation to escalate according to his script. But she was operating from a different text entirely, one he could not read. Defeated by her silence, he dragged the chair back to his circle, the triumphant hunter returning with a prize that had inexplicably surrendered without a fight, spoiling the thrill of the chase. His Marines offered a few half-hearted chuckles, but they could sense their leader's frustration. The performance had fallen flat. Drummond sat, but he could not let it go. His gaze kept drifting back to the corner, to the woman who had ignored him. Who was she? A tourist? A student from the local college? Probably a dependa, he thought with a sneer. One of those spouses who hung around the base, trying to absorb some of the reflected glory of the uniform. He decided to try again, to force the reaction he had been denied. He stood up and ambled back, this time under the pretense of heading to the restroom, which was conveniently located past her table. As he passed, his elbow swung out, a clumsy, accidental motion that connected squarely with her tablet, sending it skittering off the table. It hit the filthy floor with a solid, expensive-sounding thud. This, he thought with grim satisfaction, would have to get a response. Destruction of property. A public scene. The room quieted slightly. Even his own men winced. It was one thing to be an ass. It was another to be a vandal. Iris Thorne's reaction was, once again, a masterclass in the unnerving. She did not gasp. She did not cry out. She did not look at him with anger. Her movements were economical, precise, and devoid of any wasted energy. She placed her stylus neatly on the table, took a deep breath, and then bent down in a smooth, athletic motion. She picked up the tablet. She inspected its armored casing, running a thumb over the point of impact. She checked the screen, which flickered once and then stabilized. Finding no damage, she placed it back on the table, aligning it perfectly with the edge. Then, and only then, did her pale gray eyes lift to meet his. There was no anger in them. There was no fear. There was something far worse. Assessment. She was looking at him not as a person, but as a problem, a variable that needed to be calculated and solved. Her expression was one of mild, clinical curiosity, the look a scientist might give a specimen that was behaving in an unexpected, but ultimately predictable way. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. In that brief span, Rex Drummond felt, for the first time in a very long time, small. He felt seen, not as the boisterous sergeant of Marines, but as something raw, insecure, and transparent. "The device is hardened against kinetic shock," she said. Her voice was low and clear, with no discernible accent and no trace of emotion. "It is designed to withstand far worse than you." She did not shout. She did not accuse. It was a simple statement of fact. And it was the most profound insult he had ever received. It reframed his act of aggression not as a display of power, but as a pathetic, ineffective test against a system far beyond his comprehension. He was a gnat buzzing against a blast door. Before he could formulate a response, a retort, an excuse, her eyes had already dismissed him, returning to the complex world on her screen. The interaction was over. She had won, and he did not even understand the rules of the game they had been playing. He retreated to the bar, his face a mask of confusion and rage, the laughter of his men now sounding hollow and distant in his ears. The world ended not with a bang, but with a deep, gut-wrenching thrum. It was a sound felt more than heard, a subsonic vibration that traveled through the soles of their boots and up their spines, rattling teeth in their sockets. For a half-second, the universe held its breath. The glasses on the bar shivered, the pool balls trembled, and the neon anchor outside flickered and died. Then came the concussion. A silent, invisible fist slammed into the anchor chain, bowing the windows inward until they exploded into a million glittering shards. The front door was ripped from its hinges and hurtled across the room. Bottles rained down from the shelves behind the bar, and the world dissolved into a maelstrom of screaming, shattering glass, and the primal animal roar of an immense and violent release of energy. A monstrous, blossoming flower of fire bloomed against the night sky in the direction of the commercial port, a few miles down the coast. It climbed higher and higher, a horrifying spectacle of orange and black, illuminating the surrounding area with the light of a false and terrible dawn. The initial roar was followed by a series of secondary pops and bangs, and the distant, rising wail of sirens, a sound that seemed hopelessly inadequate for the scale of the disaster unfolding. Chaos took immediate and total command of the bar. Panic, a wild and contagious beast, was uncaged. Marines trained for combat were disoriented. Their enemy was not a man with a rifle, but a formless, overwhelming event. They reacted on instinct, which for many meant shouting and adding to the confusion. The bar owner, a paunchy man named Sal, stood frozen behind his counter, his face slack with disbelief. The younger Marines looked to Sergeant Drummond, their alpha, their leader. Drummond, to his credit, tried to assert control. He scrambled to his feet, bellowing orders that were torn from the first page of the generic crisis playbook. "Everyone stay calm! Get down! Get away from the windows!" The commands were useless. Everyone was already on the floor, and the windows were already gone. His voice, usually a tool of command, was now just more noise in the symphony of panic. He was shouting into the abyss. His authority, so absolute just moments before, now revealed as a fragile construct, shattered as easily as the glass. He was a man trained to fight wars of straight lines and clear objectives, and this was something else entirely. A messy, sprawling, civilian catastrophe. He had no protocol for this. In the corner, the world had also turned upside down for Eris Thorne. The blast wave had thrown her from her chair, slamming her against the wall. For a moment, she lay stunned, the air driven from her lungs. But where others saw chaos, she saw data. The low-frequency thrum preceding the shockwave, the color and shape of the fire plume, the duration of the initial blast. Her mind, a finely tuned analytical engine, was already processing, categorizing, and formulating. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. It was an inefficient use of cognitive resources. She pushed herself to her feet. Her movements, once defined by stillness, were now characterized by a breathtaking, fluid efficiency. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion. She was a creature of pure purpose. The unassuming civilian was gone, stripped away by the crucible of crisis. In her place stood something else, something ancient and formidable. She swept the room with her gaze, her eyes cataloging injuries, structural weaknesses, and potential threats in a fraction of a second. She saw the panicked huddle of Marines, the frozen bar owner, the screaming patrons. She saw Sergeant Drummond, loud and ineffective, a general fighting the last war. Then she took command. She did not shout. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed a quality of absolute authority that cut through the din like a laser. It was the voice of someone who had spoken in the heart of storms and been obeyed. "You!" Her finger snapped out, pointing at two of the young lance corporals who were huddled near the pool table. "Stop gawking. Get to that rear wall. Check for stress fractures. Look for bowing or buckling in the main support beam. Report back in 30 seconds. Go." The two Marines, startled by the sheer certainty in her voice, scrambled to obey without a second thought. They were accustomed to following orders, and these were the first coherent orders they had heard. "Sergeant," her eyes locked onto Drummond, "get a head count. Now. Separate the walking wounded from the critical. We need a casualty collection point. Use the area behind the bar. It's the most structurally sound part of the building. I want a number in 1 minute." Drummond stared at her, his mind struggling to reconcile the quiet woman from the corner with the field commander who had just materialized from thin air. For a moment, his pride, his rank, his entire identity rebelled. Who was this civilian to give him orders? But the rebellion was short-lived, crushed by the undeniable radiant competence emanating from her. Her commands were not suggestions. They were facts. They were the correct and logical things to do, and he knew it. His training recognized her expertise even if his ego did not. He found himself nodding, turning to bark at his men, his own voice now an instrument of her will. "Bar owner, Sal!" she called out, her eyes already moving to the next problem. "Kill the main gas line and the electrical breaker. Do it now, before a secondary fire starts in the kitchen. Sal, jolted from his stupor, fumbled under the bar and disappeared into the back. In less than a minute, Eris Thorne had transformed a panicked mob into a semi-organized response team. She moved through the debris-strewn room with a strange, predatory grace, her mind working several steps ahead of the unfolding disaster. She knelt beside an injured woman, her fingers finding a pulse with practiced ease, her voice a low, calming murmur as she assessed the injury. She pulled a compact but comprehensive medkit from her bag, applying a pressure dressing with swift, expert motions. She was a whirlwind of focused action, a node of pure order in a universe of entropy. The lance corporals returned, reporting the rear wall was stable. She nodded, already processing the information. Good. Find me anything that can be used as a stretcher. Tabletops, doors, anything. Drummond gave her a number. 17 injured, 2 critical. She absorbed the data. Establish a clear path to the rear exit. We move the criticals first, as soon as we know the outside air is clear. She pulled a satellite phone from a side pocket of her bag, a piece of equipment that looked far too advanced for a civilian, and dialed a number from memory. Her side of the conversation was a stream of clipped, precise jargon that silenced anyone near enough to hear. Cerberus Actual to Olympus. I have a situation. Grid reference 34.77 north, 77.43 west. Suspected industrial explosion, massive yield, hydrocarbon base, possible chemical additives. I am on site, establishing ad hoc command. I need atmospheric analysis, casualty projections, and a full asset mobilization. Protocol Chimera is in effect. Acknowledge. There was a pause. The voice on the other end was inaudible, but her response was sharp. Affirmative, Olympus. Cerberus Actual is secure. Out. She disconnected the call and looked up. The entire room was staring at her. The chaos had subsided, replaced by a stunned, awestruck silence. They had all witnessed the transformation. They had watched a butterfly shed its cocoon and reveal itself to be a hornet. Sergeant Drummond stood frozen, a half-formed question on his lips. Who was this woman? Cerberus Actual, Protocol Chimera. It was the language of a world he knew existed but had never seen. The shadowy realm of special operations where legends were made and buried. Before anyone could speak, the wail of sirens grew deafeningly loud. Emergency vehicles, fire trucks, and military police cruisers swarmed the area, their flashing lights painting the smoky air in strobing blues and reds. The first wave of official help had arrived. But it was not the firefighters or the MPs who would provide the final, stunning piece of the puzzle. It was the vehicle that arrived last. A black, up-armored Chevrolet Suburban, devoid of any markings, screeched to a halt directly in front of what was left of the bar's entrance. The door flew open, and a man emerged, moving with the unhurried urgency of someone whose authority was absolute. He was a Marine colonel, his rank insignia gleaming on the collar of his immaculate uniform. His face was a roadmap of a long and difficult career, his eyes sharp and intelligent. This was Colonel Vance, the base's commanding officer for special operations, a man whose name was spoken with a mixture of fear and reverence. He ignored the fire chiefs and the police captains who were trying to get his attention. His eyes scanned the chaotic scene, not with confusion, but with a specific, searching intensity. He was looking for something, or someone. Then his eyes found her. He saw Eris Thorne standing in the center of the bar's wreckage, the satellite phone still in her hand. A profound change came over the colonel's entire being. The hard lines of his face softened with a look of immense relief. The tension in his shoulders vanished. He strode forward, his polished boots crunching on the broken glass, his path a straight and unerring line toward her. He bypassed Sergeant Drummond as if he were a piece of furniture. He ignored the injured, the medics, and the chaos. His universe, at that moment, contained only two people, himself and the woman in the plain black shirt. He came to a stop 3 feet in front of her. He did not offer a handshake or a casual greeting. He snapped his body into the most rigid, formal brace of attention that Rex Drummond had ever seen. It was a gesture of profound, almost reverent respect, the kind a soldier gives not just to a superior officer, but to a living embodiment of their highest ideals. "Dr. Thorne," the colonel's voice was a sharp crack, resonating with deference. "Colonel Vance, I have a forward command post established at Grid 097. The initial perimeter is secure. Your unit is airborne, ETA 6 minutes. The advance team is 2 mics out. We have a live feed from the drone, but we're blind on ground-level contaminants. What are your orders?" The words fell into the sudden, deathly silence of the bar like meteorites. "Dr. Thorne, your unit, your orders," addressed from a full colonel to a woman in civilian clothes. It was a violation of the natural laws of the military universe. Sergeant Drummond felt the floor drop out from under him. His mind reeled, trying to process the impossible data stream. The condescending question he had asked what felt like a lifetime ago. "May I sit here?" echoed in his skull, now sounding like the bleating of a fool. The narrator's voice, for a moment, would step in to fill the void of comprehension, to explain what every person in that room was struggling to understand. Dr. Eris Thorne was not a tourist. She was not a spouse. She was not even military. She was something far rarer. She was the civilian director and chief scientist of the Department of Defense's Applied Canine Sciences Division, a unit so classified that its very existence was a subject of rumor and myth. Her call sign, Cerberus Actual, was a legend whispered in the briefing rooms of Tier 1 operators. Her unit was not comprised of men, but of genetically engineered and cybernetically enhanced canines, each one a multi-million-dollar asset capable of tasks that bordered on science fiction. They could detect specific human DNA from airborne particulates, track a target through a chemical spill, and identify neurotoxins long before any machine could. They were the ultimate search and rescue, biodetection, and reconnaissance tools, and Eris Thorne was their creator, their trainer, and their absolute commander. She was a quiet, unassuming academic with a PhD in neurobiology and genetics who held more operational authority in a crisis zone than most generals. She was, in the words of one of them, the single most valuable low-profile asset in the entire American arsenal. And Sergeant Rex Drummond had told her to move her chair. The reckoning came not in the heat of the crisis, but hours later, in the cold, sterile light of the temporary command post. The disaster was contained, the fires were being fought, and the search and rescue operation was in full swing, now spearheaded by Thorne's incredible canine assets, which moved through the rubble with an otherworldly intelligence. Colonel Vance had requested Sergeant Drummond's presence. He found him standing near a supply truck, his face pale, his uniform stained with dust and the blood of the people he had helped save under her direction. The colonel was in a cold fury. "Sergeant," he began, his voice dangerously quiet, "I have received a full report of your conduct prior to the incident. Harassing a civilian, willful destruction of government property, because I assure you, that tablet is a highly classified piece of government property. Conduct unbecoming a Marine non-commissioned officer. I am half a mind to have you stripped of those stripes and sent to the brig for the next 6 months. Have you got anything to say for yourself?" Drummond stood straight, his eyes fixed on a point in the middle distance. He looked broken. "No, sir," he whispered. "I have no excuse." "Damn right you don't." A voice, calm and measured, interrupted them. "That won't be necessary, Colonel." Dr. Aris Thorne emerged from the command tent. She had a fresh shirt on, but her face was smudged with soot, and her eyes were weary but sharp. She walked over to the two men. "With all due respect, Colonel, a court-martial is a waste of resources," she said, her gaze fixed on Drummond. "What the sergeant demonstrated tonight was not malice. It was a catastrophic failure in threat assessment, a critical lapse in observational analysis." She turned her full attention to Drummond, and he felt like he was being pinned to a specimen board. "Sergeant," she began, her tone that of a professor conducting a post-mortem on a failed experiment. "You operate in a world of clearly defined hierarchies: rank, uniform, posture. These are your data points, and you use them to build a model of your environment. Your model is efficient, but flawed. It is brittle. When presented with an anomaly, an entity that does not fit your established parameters, your system failed. You defaulted to a primitive protocol, dominance assertion based on superficial characteristics. You saw a female, in civilian attire, behaving passively, and you classified her as a non-threat, a non-entity. You were not just rude, Sergeant. You were tactically blind." She took a step closer. "In a combat zone, that kind of analytical failure gets people killed. Your pride, your need to perform for your subordinates, became a liability. You failed to recognize a high-value asset operating in your vicinity. You actively antagonized that asset. And when the crisis hit, your initial response was based on a flawed playbook. You were noise. I was signal. Your punishment should not be punitive. It should be educational." Colonel Vance looked at her, intrigued. "What do you have in mind, Doctor?" "I am filing a request for an interdepartmental transfer," she stated, never taking her eyes off the mortified sergeant. "I need a new logistics NCO for my forward deployment team. The work is grueling. It involves endless inventory, cross-loading pallets in harsh conditions, and managing the operational needs of my handlers. It is a job with no glory whatsoever, but it will require the sergeant to be in constant proximity to my unit. He will be forced to observe, to learn, and to see the value in things he cannot immediately understand. He will spend the next 2 years of his life supporting the very quiet, lethal competence he chose to mock in a bar. His education will be his sentence." The colonel considered this. A slow smile spread across his face. It was a brilliant, almost cruel solution. It was not about retribution. It was about reconstruction. He would break Drummond down and let Thorne rebuild him into something better. "Request approved, Doctor," Vance said. He turned to Drummond. "Congratulations, Sergeant. You're going to work with the dogs." The story of that night passed into the institutional lore of the base. It became a modern military fable, a cautionary tale told by grizzled gunnery sergeants to their cocky new corporals. It was the story of Dog Drummond and the quiet woman in the anchor chain. The details were embellished with each telling. The explosion grew larger, Thorne's commands more dramatic, the colonel's salute more epic. But the core truth, the essential lesson, remained intact. Years passed. The storytellers changed. And one of the most effective tellers of that story was a master gunnery sergeant named Rex Drummond. He was an instructor now at the Advanced NCO Academy. He was a different man. The boisterous arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet, thoughtful authority. He was lean, not bulky, and his eyes held a wisdom that only comes from being thoroughly and completely humbled. He stood before a class of newly promoted sergeants, the future leaders of the Corps. "Let me tell you a story," he would begin, his voice quiet but commanding. "It's about the most dangerous person I ever met, and she never raised her voice, never wore a uniform, and never carried a weapon. It's a story about a mistake I made, a mistake that almost cost me my career, but instead gave me an education." He would tell them everything: the bar, the chair, the tablet, his own pathetic insecurity. He would describe the explosion and his own useless panic. He would describe her, Dr. Eris Thorne, and the way she brought order to chaos with nothing but her voice and her will. He spoke of her with a deep and abiding reverence. He told them about the 2 years he spent as her logistics NCO, watching her and her incredible animals perform miracles in the darkest corners of the world. He learned, he told them, that the most dangerous weapon on any battlefield is a quiet, analytical mind. He learned that true strength does not need to announce itself, it simply is. "Your biggest weakness as a leader," he would conclude, his eyes sweeping over the young, confident faces before him, "is your assumptions. The moment you think you have someone figured out based on what you see, you have created a blind spot. And in that blind spot, disaster waits. Look for the quiet ones. Watch the ones who listen more than they talk. Respect the competence that doesn't come wrapped in a uniform. The real titans, the real masters of this craft, are not the ones holding court at the bar. They are the ones sitting in the corner, reading the schematics, preparing for the storm you don't even know is coming." And so the lesson was passed on, a lesson forged in fire and humility, a lesson that stated in the clearest possible terms a universal and timeless truth. That substance will always, eventually, triumph over style. That actions are the only argument that truly matters. That authority is not taken, but earned through undeniable competence. And that the loudest voice in the room is almost always the weakest. True strength is quiet. True power needs no introduction. It simply waits, calm and observant, for the moment it is needed, ready to impose its will on the chaos of the world.